Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. This is one of a series of talks given by academics as part of our Teaching Innovation Awards initiative. For those of you who are new to LearnSci, we specialize in education technology designed to support students' technical, analytical, and experimental skills within university science programs. We offer a range of resources, tools, and services which work seamlessly alongside your teaching modules to enhance and support students in their acquisition of experimental skills. I'm Bill Heslop, the Managing Director at LearnSci, and for the past 6 years, our awards have been turning the spotlight on digital innovation across universities. So we showcase exceptional work from our academic partners who are using our tools, alongside other pioneering digital practices from non-partners. The awards celebrate educators and teams going above and beyond their normal teaching practices. They also foster community collaboration by sharing innovative ideas to inspire fellow academics and to address current sector challenges. If you're interested in the awards, you can go to our website to find summaries of all the projects that have happened over the past 6 years. And if you're interested in getting involved yourself and applying for an award, then there's also information there about how you can do that later in the year when the awards for 2026 open. If you're also interested in education research and taking your projects all the way through to publication, then there are pages on the website that you can look at, which gives information and more details about how we can support you in those kinds of projects. So a few points about today's webinar. The presentation is being recorded and will be made publicly available so that viewers who can't be here today can watch. So please mute your microphone during the presentation. If you have your cameras on, that's fine, but you feel free to switch them off if you'd prefer to. There will be a chance to ask lots of questions at the end. You can either do that by posting a question in the chat or by engaging directly with Vino and asking her questions directly. Without further ado, it's a great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Vino Paideya from the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Good afternoon, colleagues. And so this presentation actually focuses on an innovation, a digital approach to actually supporting first-year chemistry students through first-year pre-labs. Just a little bit about who I am. I'm Dr. Vino Paideya from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I work at the Department of Chemistry as a first-year academic. Durban is actually one of the places in South Africa that very few people speak about, but it's a very, very beautiful city. Just to show you our shoreline there, it is a coastal city, and that's the promenade where no matter the season, you will find people from Durban walking the promenade and using that walkway every weekend to exercise. We have beautiful beaches, and obviously our World Cup Stadium, which was built in 2010, which is very beautiful and is used now throughout the years for concerts and all sorts of sporting activities. Yes, and so a little bit of about the University of KwaZulu-Natal. We have 3 campuses: Westville, where I'm based, and Howard College, where I also teach the engineering students, and we have our Pietermaritzburg campus. So there are 3 campuses that actually belong to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and they are all Durban-based. So I'm going to take you on a little journey about my research. As you all are well aware, as literature is also saying, that globally first-year students really struggle with limited laboratory exposure and making their transition from school very, very difficult. And there's limited prior laboratory exposure among many first-year students, where they come from schools where the teacher actually does the experiment. They're unfamiliar with the apparatus, with the chemicals, or any of the lab kind of activities. And so laboratory skills are also lacking. So this results in a lack of confidence, language barriers, conceptual barriers as well, that affect their learning and reduce engagement in the lab. So a lack of preparedness leads to dependency on the lab demonstrators. And this can be a real problem where the experience that we actually want the students to have in the lab then becomes more a recipe type thing, where they constantly are not confident about what they're doing. They have no idea about the laboratory apparatus, and there is total dependence on the lab demonstrator. So I've kind of framed the problem as students often arriving unprepared, which results in procedural errors and misconceptions with the concepts being dealt with. There's anxiety and reduced engagement because of all the previous mentioned lack of knowledge, and the need. Therefore, the need arose for a more scaffolded, confidence-building pre-laboratory experience. And so we looked at the digital innovation, and this was implemented in collaboration with the Learn Science team, and the intention was to create an online pre-lab activities that formed a bridge between theory, which is taught in class, and the practical activities that exercises that we wanted the students to engage with in the laboratory, and to also develop laboratory skills which were lacking in the students, and to improve lab preparedness. There would be some days that students would actually come to the lab without even reading the pre-lab, because they felt that this was such a mammoth task. And also the language. Science is a language on its own, and we are dealing also with many second language learners. So just merely reading a lab exercise, which we would think that is a very simple thing to do, seemed to be a mammoth task for them. So how did this digital innovation actually proceed? So we started with weekly digital pre-lab activities, which were integrated into the Moodle LMS system at UKZN. And these actually looked like your interactive simulations, which were produced by the Learn Science team, as well as smart worksheets, which were worked through in collaboration with the Learn Science team. So we had weekly meetings, and we looked at what UKZN had to offer in terms of pre-labs, and we worked together to actually create smart worksheets with guided prompts and conceptual questions. And I will show you these in a little while, and they have automated feedback to actually help the students along in their pre-lab exercises. So if I look at the pedagogical foundations that these pre-labs actually built on, they built on the foundation of constructive and alignment, active learning, and the universal design of learning. So just to talk you through a little bit about the theoretical framework that it's based on. So it's grounded on active learning and constructivism, and the theory of universal design for learning by Rose and Mayer, 2002. If you'd like to have a look at these theories. So active networks provide multiple means of engagement, allowing students with different abilities to engage differently with the different types of active networks that are available. Recognition networks provide multiple means of representation. So they are visuals, and depending on the types of learner, the way learners engage, they're visual learners and different, and learners who learn in different ways. Then these strategic networks that provide multiple means of action and expression. And so, this allows learners of different abilities to engage differently with the resources that are being provided for them. And then the learning analytics provide adaptive feedback and track student engagement, which is part of the pedagogical framework of the study. And it also encourage student agency and reflection. So students get to actually, when they get stuff wrong, get to reflect on the links that they've created with the conceptual and the conceptual understanding of the theories being presented. So in terms of the implementation and the student experience, these smart worksheets and simulations were presented to our first year modules, Chem 110, 120, and then our engineering modules, Chem 161 and 181. They were based on weekly LMS simulations and activity worksheets, and were completed by the students, and they were given a week to complete these activities. That is based on a flipped classroom approach, where the students get to work on the pre-lab in their own time, and then get to come into the lab and experience the lab exercise. So the activities were co-designed, as I said, were co-designed in collaboration with the Learn Science team, chemistry academics, lab demonstrators, as well as teaching assistants. So just to show you what these Learn Science simulations looked like, and the ones that we actually used. And so if a reflux was part of the lab activity, then the simulation that we chose was the reflux. Just to give you an idea, this is the typical simulation, and the students would get to set up the reflux condenser and have several goes at setting it up, and then they would get a response of whether the setup was correct or not. And as you can see, it gives them different options, and they can have a go at this several times until they get the setup correct. Okay. And then we looked at the smart worksheets, which was worked in collaboration with the Learn Science team. And here, this is just an example of one of them. And yeah, so the students will input their results in here. So, for example, if they added a result there, it would then say, okay, tick it off as correct. This example does not show you, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get an example where the response is wrong, and the feedback back bubble will pop up and allow the student to have a second try at it. So we actually assign marks to these smart worksheets. And so if the student got the answer outright, then they get the full mark. If they used the support of the the feedback that was presented, then they would get part mark. And if they opted to gave up and opted for for the answer to be reflected, because the answer is dependent on the next question, then they got no mark. And so This has worked pretty well, and so the students are actually encouraged to try and work this out on their own rather than settle for the answer, because they know that their mark would be reduced. And yeah, so that's how our smart worksheets actually work, with a feedback that is offered to students who are struggling to and fail to get the answer out on their first attempt. Right. So just to kind of summarize what I've been saying, so the Learn Science simulations actually allowed the students to develop lab skills. The LMS pre-lab exercise prepared students for a lab session. And the feedback dashboard monitored misconceptions. And it actually is very interesting because as academics, you can go back and have a look at where students were struggling, what are the different concepts that they did not understand, and kind of reinforce these in your teaching. So when students come to the lecture, these concepts can be reinforced. So you have an idea, what are the misconceptions, what are they struggling with, and so forth, and how long they are actually taking to complete these activities. And then we have the active learning tasks that promote reflection and understanding, as I just mentioned. And then the co-design of the meetings allow for contextual alignment. And so feedback from the lab demonstrators as well as the teaching assistants actually helped us to define these activities, and as well as allowed us to refine our teaching and our emphasis on different conceptual concepts in the lectures. So the evaluation approach, so the LMS analytics were, as I said, are extremely beneficial in terms of understanding what students, where students are struggling, and what is it that they have no issues about. The assessment of this students' performance also tells you, how students are doing with the different topics and the different aspects in the laboratory exercises. And then the lecturer and demonstrator observations in the lab also kind of triangulate the evaluation of the pre-labs. And then obviously, again, as I said, we get back to the LMS analytics as a full circle evaluation to actually say, okay, we understand how the students are progressing through the course. So what were our major findings in this exercise? So we found that completion rates and engagement increased significantly compared to prior, where students would enter the lab without completing the pre-lab exercise. And this really caused a lot of problems in the lab. Students demonstrated improved conceptual understanding. So if we kind of went to them in the lab and asked them about what they were doing and as well as how they're engaging in the different exercises, they were able to articulate better than before. Not 100%, better, but significantly better than before. Then the analytics for the first year modules showed completion rates above 90%, which was significantly better than previous years without the simulations and the smart worksheets. And then there's improved lab preparedness, where students actually came, understanding the different apparatus. Okay, this is the apparatus that I need to use. These are the reagents that I need to be looking for, and this is how I would carry out my calculations and so forth. If the little diagram that I have here shows that we are able to see how many attempts, how many students actually attempted. And this is the class with a class of 185 students, and you can see 178 students attempted the pre-lab before the lab session. Why the small number of students do not attempt it? This is something that we're working on, and it could be for several reasons. And believe me, there are some instances where we do get 100% response rate, which is great. However, there is that small 5% who regularly do not attempt for whatever reason. Either they were not well, they had too many tests to deal with and just let the pre-lab slide because they believe that the lab holds a higher mark. But I think we are honing on to the down on these to ensure that we get 100% attempt to the pre-labs, because we've seen the difference it makes to the lab experience. And so if I look at the student experience, and Learn Science as well as myself have sent out questionnaires to the students, asking them about their Learn Science experience, and they've told us that this show said that there's increased confidence, reduced anxiety, improved conceptual understanding, and the appreciation for self-paced learning. So given the week to actually work through the exercise is something that they enjoy, as well as the feedback that they get, which really has played a significant improvement in what we see in the pre-lab experience. And as well as in the lab, when we speak to the students, we don't see as much anxiety as we did before, and also the breakage of equipment with this anxiety. Right, I've kind of done a table to show what were the prior experiences and the after the intervention experiences. And as I said before, procedural errors and misconceptions were very common before, and now we see few of them. The focus was on answers to the reports without understanding prior, and now there's greater focus on higher order thinking. And we see this in the way the students answer the questions that we pose to them during the lab. Larger number of students came unprepared and worked beyond lab time. So lab closes at 5 p.m. and we would see that students were struggling to complete that lab report, and some of them were even washing up way after close time. Now we have better use of laboratory time. Students are engaging with the report and have significant amount of time to engage with the report, and they have completed their lab activities at least 45 minutes before the lab closes. And prior to this, there was no lens to understand students' experiences. Now we have these targeted interventions through the analytics, which is very helpful for both students as well as the academics, as well as our teaching assistants and demonstrators. Just to show you some of the analytics that are available to us. So the one shows the number of attempts. For example, if we were using the reflux that I just showed you, we see that that there's a significant number of students who actually use the lab sims regularly, and this is probably so that they improve their lab skills. And then we can see the use of the smart worksheets. Well, the smart worksheets, we have greater than 90% of students attempting them because there's a mark associated with the smart worksheets. And then we do have the custom smart worksheets as well, and we can see that students are engaging with these, and then the bioscience labs as well. Okay, and then here on the other analytics, we actually see which of these lab sims are being used to a greater extent, and we can see vacuum filtration is used a lot in organic chemistry in semester 2, which I've taken this data from. And so students are going through the use of the Buchner funnel simulation, as well as safety and titrations are being used. The titration setup is being used significantly. And so this is very helpful, as I just said, for both the lab demonstrators as well as the academics. Yeah. So some of the feedback, authentic voices that we got, and so if I asked how beneficial was the smart worksheets and how did they help you, and some of the responses were they improved my calculations and they corrected my mistakes. I learn better by providing effective feedback. It helps me be motivated and ready for the practical sessions. Now I understand concepts I struggled with previously. Smart worksheets enhances my confidence in working in the lab, and the lab sims help me understand the different equipment we use in the lab. There were several others. I just picked a few to share here. And then we asked the demonstrators as well about what were their experiences, and demonstrators reported less stress in the lab sessions, higher student confidence, and completion of lab activities within the lab session. The analytics showed consistent task completion by majority of students before the lab sessions, and increased readiness reduced time spent on remedial guidance in the lab. Yeah, and so you can see that the demonstrators also felt that there was not 100% dependence on them now that we were using the lab sims and the smart worksheets. So implications and future directions. So this work is scalable across science disciplines, and it also incorporates it can also incorporate video demonstrations, which we are working to include in the near future. We can also add multilingual support to this for our large number of multilingual students, and these continued research and refinement that can be attached to this project. And and many papers that I see myself writing in the near future based on the data that I have spoken about. In conclusion, digital pre-lab activities have shown to strengthen readiness, promote equity in teaching and learning, enhance learning experiences, and advance teaching excellence. And I firmly say that me getting the Teaching Excellence Award is a testament to the direction we're going with this. My concluding thoughts. Thoughtful digital transformation is not about replacing laboratories with virtual activities, but rather ensuring that every student enters them prepared, confident, and ready to learn. Thank you for listening. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you, Vino, for that excellent presentation. It was so interesting to see all of the data that you presented there, and there's lots to talk about. I've got a quick question to start us off, and it'd be great if anyone has other questions. So you talked about the 90% completion rate, but there was one stat there, one of the graphs you showed, which was extraordinary as well, because it showed, I think, nearly 100,000 activities used, 65,000 chemistry lab sim activities used in a single year. So not only do you get high completion rates, but it seems like you've rolled this out across almost all of your experiments to get this level of usage, with engagement levels that are enviable, and most universities would love to replicate those kinds of engagement numbers. So how have you managed, do you think, to achieve that, both from student motivation, but also just to get everything rolled out so consistently? What would be your recommendations in those areas?
Okay, so today my presentation was solely on first year, which is my baby, and I'm a first year chemistry academic, and that's where my passion lies. However, I do teach on the other modules, and I've taught the third year module, and I've used the simulations there, and therefore you see the large activity within the simulations. Then I have other colleagues in second year as well who are using the simulations in their teaching. So the data that you see is not only with first year, it's second and third year usage as well. So yeah, so we have been using it across.
Yeah, and it seems as though your colleagues are very sort of coordinated and willing to to create this experience consistently across first year, second year, and third year.
So it's about buy-in and the use of these, and to see that it significantly improves practice and allows students without lab skills to actually develop them on their own, using the simulations, and then to try them in the lab. Yeah, and so it's being used across, and as well as on different campuses as well. And so therefore the large the response rate that you are looking at.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, Vino. Thank you so much for that talk. It's really, really great. I've just got a couple of things that have popped into my mind. There are two elements that you highlighted that you felt your students had become a bit better at as a result of using these pre-lab resources, and that was how they articulated better what they were supposed to be talking about in the laboratory, and that they seemed better prepared, so that preparedness had increased. And it's certainly something that I know I've seen if I've used pre-lab resources such as the lab simulations, but also videos as well that I might have made myself. But the thing that really grabbed my attention was what you said about we can see those changes when we're in the laboratory. We get that, we get a feel for how students feel. They're a bit more, they're talking about the right things rather than what do I add into what, and do I have to mix it or vortex it, those kind of technical questions. And the point was that you've now have a lens through which you can understand or look at student learning behavior just by utilizing these resources. And that's just fascinating, because you're absolutely right. And what is it that utilizing these resources has allowed you to see better by using these as a lens through understanding, a lens to look through to understand student behavior and student learning experiences? Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was really insightful.
One of the things that we really struggle with is the use, a simple thing like the use of a mass balance, and so if we're weighing out some product, then I would put the simulation on the use of the mass balance. as part of the activity. And so they would do all sorts of crazy things before, start adding product, while the vial is on the balance, drop the product all over the scale and see and think nothing of it, that, that part of it, the product is lying on the balance and not in the vial, and record that result as, something that is correct. But I think after they work through the simulation and understand the concept of, that you need, to follow the procedure, I see them following the procedure. There are one or two who still, will mess up and need that guidance, but it's not like before, where students are struggling to weigh by difference, understand the concept of what it means to weigh by difference, or what it means to, to tear the mass balance. Those concepts are much better handled now in the laboratory. Yeah. And then obviously, then there are other examples of, when it comes to titrations, which it's not only the visuals that I see that they engaged with, it's also the theory that's placed on science that's also very, very helpful.
Okay. And so the combination of you seeing them actually performing technically more accurately and being able to look at the analytics, you can now see, I guess you were saying, that lens, you can use that as a tool to help you understand their learning behaviors. And so you can see where they're struggling a little bit, and then you can kind of correlate that with what you're seeing in the laboratory and how they're then behaving. So I really like the idea of that, utilizing the LearnSci resources can act as a lens through which you can start to, understand and see, as a tool to use to help us understand student learning behaviors and what they're struggling with. Thank you.
Any other questions for Vino? I had a quick question, Vino. You mentioned reduced time spent on remedial guidance within the laboratory by demonstrators, I think. What do you think the impact is on demonstrators, for example, having students more prepared? Do you think it improves their quality of experience as well, or are you not really worried about that? It's more about the students.
I think previously I think the reliance on the demonstrator to get this right was huge, and I think that they feel that the pressure is less now, because and I think they weren't getting it right because students were then leaving the lab late, and so with the assistance of simulations and the assistance that the step-by-step assistance that they get, and the feedback that is provided with the smart worksheets, kind of, doesn't make them the focal point now of, all these hands up. There's virtually about, I'd say, 42 students in a lab at any given time, and there's 3 demonstrators. So it's a mammoth task. And so, and everybody kind of asking the same questions, because they are now using it as a recipe type thing rather than an understanding, coming from an understanding point of view. And I see that students also come into the lab with a little piece of paper of how to do the calculations, or the kind of the feedback that they got from the smart worksheet, so to assist them with the activity that they need to do in class, because the activity that they do in class is one that has to be handed after the lab. So so there's that kind of support that Learn Science kind of provides to assist them to navigate through the lab session.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, I think just one final round of applause for Vino. Thank you very much for this presentation. It's fascinating to see how this works in your Durban environment, and Durban looks absolutely beautiful, by the way. So you're very lucky to be based there. I just have a couple of things to show for the next presentations that we will have. So we have two more presentations coming up, one in July and one in early August. The first one from Sheffield Hallam University, again looking at pre-lab resources, and secondly from Taylor's University in Malaysia, looking at harnessing learning analytics. So there's the QR code. Please come along to those and invite your colleagues to come along if you're interested in those two areas. I'll stop sharing for a second, and thank you to everyone for attending the webinar. Thank you, Vino, again, and have a great rest of your day.